I went to the town hall to check the paperwork related to his farm. I found a land transfer contract. It clearly stated that my grandfather had signed it on the 5th of last month, agreeing to sell all land use rights to the Sycamore Heights HOA for the development of an ecotourism area. His signature was at the bottom of the contract. Believe it or not, I felt the blood rush to my face. But I knew one thing for sure. It was not my grandfather's signature. Someone had forged his signature. I always thought my grandfather was the strongest man I had ever known. He had survived wars, poverty, and raised an entire family on this land. But now, as I stood in front of the farm, the land he had protected for 50 years, I felt like everything had crumbled. He was gone. My mother called me that evening, her voice trembling. "Ethan, come home. Your grandfather, he's passed away." I froze. I never imagined this day would come. My grandfather was old, yes, but he was strong. He worked every day, took care of his orchard, and walked the land he loved. There was no way he could have just dropped dead. But when I got home, I realized the truth was far worse than I had ever imagined. He didn't die of old age. He died from shock. My family told me that earlier that morning, the Sycamore Heights HOA had shown up at the farm. Margaret Holloway, the HOA president, along with 2 men in black suits, stood on the front porch with a thick stack of documents. "Mr. Tom, you need to sign this. Your farm has been designated for Sycamore Heights' new ecotourism project. This decision is final." My grandfather had been fighting off the HOA for years. He had refused to sell his land, no matter how much they offered him. But this time, things were different. They weren't offering anymore. They were demanding. They told him he no longer had a choice. He took the paperwork, his hands trembling as he read through the lines. And then, right there, on his own front porch, he clutched his chest. Elaine Watson, our longtime neighbor, was there that morning. She told me, "I saw your grandfather collapse, Ethan." I ran to him, but his face, it was pale, completely white. He couldn't even speak. Then he just collapsed. They killed him. They didn't use guns. They didn't use violence. They used laws, lies, and manipulation to push an old man to the brink. And the worst part? No one stopped them. No one held them accountable. They just stood there and watched him fall. By the time the paramedics arrived, it was too late. I turned to look at the farm. The fields stretched before me, the same fields my grandfather had nurtured for half a century. And now, they wanted to take it all away. Right in front of the house, a massive sign had already been put up. "Construction, coming soon. Sycamore Heights Ecotourism Resort, construction." They had put up the sign less than 24 hours after my grandfather died. These people didn't just want the land. They didn't even respect the dead. My relatives shook their heads, whispering, "Maybe it was bad luck. Maybe God didn't want to help us. Why did this have to happen?" No. This wasn't bad luck. This was murder. They killed my grandfather with their greed. And if they thought they could bulldoze through his legacy like he never existed, then they made the biggest mistake of their lives. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my grandfather collapsing on the porch, clutching his chest. And I remembered Margaret Holloway's eyes. No regret. No remorse. Just absolute control. They thought they had already won. They thought they could use their HOA status to erase an entire family's legacy, to take everything my grandfather had built. They thought they could steal this land. They were wrong. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. As I looked out the window, I noticed something strange. A black SUV was parked down the road. Its engine was still running. Someone was watching me. I clenched my fists. Fine. If they wanted a fight, I would show them that I wasn't my grandfather. I wouldn't just fight back, I would tear them apart. The next morning, I drove straight to the county clerk's office. I needed to see the official documents regarding my grandfather's property. I had suspected this, But when I finally saw the files with my own eyes, my blood boiled. There was a land transfer agreement. It stated that my grandfather had signed over the property rights to the Sycamore Heights HOA for an ecotourism development project. His signature was right there at the bottom of the document. But I knew, without a doubt, it was fake. I had seen my grandfather's signature thousands of times. On tax forms, on equipment receipts, on old letters. He always had a distinctive loop in the T of Tom Carter. But on this document, it was missing. Someone had forged his signature. And worse, the county had approved it. Frank, one of the older employees at the office, looked at me with concern. "Ethan, you shouldn't dig too deep into this." I stared him down. "Who notarized this document?" Frank hesitated. Then, with a sigh, he flipped through the file. "Judith Holloway." My stomach twisted. Margaret Holloway, HOA president. Judith Holloway, the notary who verified the land sale. 2 sisters. The entire thing was a setup. I left the county office and headed straight for Elaine Watson's house. She was one of my grandfather's closest neighbors and had known him for decades. When I knocked on the door, she opened it just a crack. Her face was pale. "Ethan, you need to leave this alone." I frowned. "You know something, don't you?" She bit her lip, looking around nervously. 2 weeks ago, your grandfather told me he felt like he was being watched. He said he saw someone snooping around his property one night. I froze. He never told me that. He didn't want you to worry. Elaine stepped outside, lowering her voice. "Margaret has been after your family's land for years. But I don't think she just wants to build a resort. There's something bigger going on here. Be careful, Ethan." I needed a professional to analyze the land. I called Professor Wilson, a retired geology professor from the State University. "What exactly do you want me to check for?" "Water." I remembered something my grandfather had once told me. "Our land has some of the purest water in the region, Ethan. It's special." If the HOA really wanted this land, maybe it wasn't about tourism at all. Maybe it was about water. 2 days later, Wilson sent me the results. "Ethan, do you know what kind of groundwater runs beneath your farm?" I gripped the phone. "What are you saying?" "You're sitting on one of the richest mineral water sources in the county. This water is so high in purity and minerals, it could be bottled and sold for millions of dollars a year." I felt a chill run down my spine. The HOA didn't care about building an ecotourism resort. They wanted to control the water supply. That night, I saw headlights approaching my house. I grabbed my shotgun and stepped onto the porch. A man in a black suit got out of the SUV. He didn't introduce himself. "We need to talk, Carter." I stood firm. "Get off my property." He smirked. "You're playing a dangerous game. If you keep pushing, there will be consequences." He pulled out a legal notice. "This is an official eviction order. You have 7 days to vacate. The land no longer belongs to you." I tore the paper in half right in front of him. "Try me." His smirk faltered. "You'll regret this." The SUV sped away into the night. But I knew they'd be back. I stood on my porch, fists clenched so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. Those bastards had just threatened me on my own land. Their SUV had disappeared into the night, but I knew the real fight was just beginning. The Sycamore Heights HOA killed my grandfather. They thought I would give up? They thought I would be scared and just hand over the land? They were dead wrong. I wasn't my grandfather. I didn't have to stay calm. I didn't have to endure. I was going to fight back. And I was going to destroy them. I called James Rodriguez, the retired lawyer helping me with legal matters. "Ethan, how much evidence do you have?" Forged signatures. Fraudulent notarization. Internal HOA documents about controlling the water supply. And a geological report proving they lied about the land's mineral deposits. James whistled on the other end of the line. That's a good start. But it's not enough to bring them down completely. What else do I need? You need proof of corruption higher up. If HOA could forge documents so easily, they must have someone in the system protecting them. Then we'll find out who it is. I couldn't fight alone. If HOA had power and money, I needed the leverage of a community uprising to tear them down. I called Sarah Thompson, one of the homeowners in Sycamore Heights who had been bullied by the HOA. Sarah, can you gather the people who've been wronged by the HOA? We've been waiting for this moment for a long time. That evening, we met at a small cafe in town. 10 people showed up, all with their own horror stories about HOA corruption. A couple fined $10,000 for planting the wrong kind of flowers in their front yard. A man forced to tear down his shed because it didn't match the community aesthetic. A family taken to court by the HOA over unpaid road maintenance fees, even though the road had never been repaired. Sarah looked at me, determination in her eyes. Ethan, do you have proof that the HOA has been stealing from us? I slammed a stack of files onto the table. This is their scam. I scanned the faces in the room. You can all keep letting them push you around. You can keep paying their ridiculous fees. Or we can stand together, fight back, and take back what's ours. The room was silent for a moment. Then James nodded, slow but firm. I'll help you. Let's take this to court. Sarah clenched her fists. I'll make sure this goes public. I had no idea I had just started a full-scale war. 2 days later, I was jolted awake at 2 a.m. by a strange noise coming from the fields. I grabbed my shotgun off the wall and ran outside. And then, I froze. A massive excavator was tearing through my eastern fence. They were starting the demolition right then and there. No warnings. No legal proceedings. They were just taking the land. I raised my gun and fired a warning shot into the air. Stop right there. The workers flinched, but one man, dressed in a black suit, didn't even react. He smirked at me. You have no legal standing here, Carter. This land belongs to the HOA now. You're lying. I pulled out my phone, hitting record. You don't mind if I live stream this to the whole town, do you? The workers hesitated. The supervisor narrowed his eyes at me, but then he signaled for them to stop. You just made a big mistake, Carter. I watched as they packed up their equipment and drove off. The next morning, I received an official notice from the HOA. Emergency meeting to discuss community development plans. They were panicking. I went with James, Sarah, and a small group of homeowners. When I walked in, Margaret Holloway was already standing at the front. She forced a smile, but I could see the tension in her eyes. Ethan Carter, you are disrupting an important project. You don't understand what you're interfering with. I stepped forward and slammed a stack of papers onto the table. I understand perfectly, Margaret. I know you forged my grandfather's signature. I know you bribed the county to approve your project. And I know the ecotourism resort is just a front for selling the underground water supply. The room erupted in whispers. Margaret went pale. Sarah raised her phone, live streaming the meeting. Listen up, everyone. The HOA has been lying to us all. And here's the proof. Some of the homeowners started shouting. You stole our money? You lied to us? How dare you try to steal someone's home? Margaret lost her composure. You idiots don't understand. The HOA makes the rules. We own this community. James smirked. Actually, Margaret, you don't. The law does. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. We're about to have all of your financials investigated. Margaret stiffened. She knew she was trapped. We had just delivered a massive blow to the HOA. But I also knew. The real fight was still ahead. I had never seen Margaret Holloway this rattled before. She stood frozen in the middle of the meeting room, her eyes darting between me, James, and the furious homeowners. The people she had controlled for years were turning against her. You don't understand. Margaret's voice was shrill. This project is for the benefit of everyone. It will raise property values, create jobs, and turn this area into a high-end destination. Sarah let out a sharp laugh, holding up her phone. Oh, really? Then explain why there's over $200,000 missing from the HOA's community fund. Money that you transferred into your own personal account. The room went silent. Margaret went pale. That's a lie. I've never stolen from the community fund. James slammed a stack of documents on the table. We pulled the bank records. These transactions came from HOA accounts, and the money went directly to you. And guess what? We also found records of your investment in the same tourism company trying to develop Ethan's land. Some of the homeowners gasped. She's been stealing from us? Where did all our fines and fees go? I paid thousands for community landscaping. What did you do with it? Margaret's eyes flickered around the room, looking for support. But no one was on her side anymore. She had ruled this community with fear and intimidation. But now, her grip was slipping. At that moment, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I stepped outside and answered. Ethan Carter, you're making a mistake. A deep, calm but menacing voice. Who is this? That's not important. What is important is that you stop this crusade now. And if I don't? The voice let out a cold chuckle. Then you'll regret it. Do you really think Margaret was acting alone? Do you think this ends with her? I don't care who's behind her. I'm not backing down. Oh, but you should. Because the people I work for, they don't just threaten. They eliminate obstacles. The call ended. My hands tightened around my phone. I knew it now. Margaret wasn't the real enemy. She was just a pawn in someone else's game. I turned back into the meeting room. Right as I stepped inside, the doors swung open. 3 uniformed officers walked in, led by Sheriff Martinez. We've received multiple complaints about fraud and illegal financial activity within the Sycamore Heights HOA. Margaret stumbled backward. Wait. No, there's a mistake. I can explain. Martinez pulled out a warrant. Margaret Holloway, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and falsifying legal documents. The room exploded. 2 deputies grabbed Margaret by the arms, locking handcuffs around her wrists. She thrashed, screaming, "You can't do this to me. I am the HOA. I make the rules." I stepped forward, looking her straight in the eyes. No, Margaret. The law makes the rules. And you broke them. She shook her head violently, but the deputies dragged her away. For the first time since this all started, the HOA was powerless. That night, after the chaos died down, I returned home. I walked into my grandfather's old storage barn, where he kept all his most important documents. I sifted through the dusty old boxes, looking for anything that could tell me what was really going on. And then, under a loose wooden floorboard, I found it. An old, yellowed envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means the HOA has finally gone too far. You must understand, they don't just want the land. They want to bury a secret beneath it. And if you don't protect it, they will destroy everything. I stared at the letter, my heart pounding. I thought I had won. I thought taking down Margaret was the end. But in reality, I had only cut off one limb of the monster. Because somewhere out there, the true mastermind was still watching. I clenched the letter in my hand. Outside, the wind howled across the fields, carrying the scent of fresh soil and the distant rustling of trees. But I barely noticed. They don't just want the land. They want to bury a secret beneath it. My grandfather had left this message, knowing that one day, someone would come for the farm. I had thought the fight was over. I had thought taking down Margaret Holloway was enough. But I was wrong. The real enemy was still out there. And now, they knew I was coming for them. I needed answers. And I knew exactly who could give them to me. Judith Holloway, Margaret's sister-in-law and the notary who had helped forge my grandfather's signature. I called her from a blocked number. She answered after 3 rings. "Ethan Carter. I was expecting your call." Her voice was calm, but wary. "You lied for Margaret. You helped forge those documents. You knew the HOA was corrupt." "Of course I did," she admitted. "But Margaret was just a puppet. The real players were the ones funding her." "Who?" There was a pause. Then she said 2 words that sent a chill down my spine. "Vestra Corporation." I gripped the phone tighter. Who the hell is Vestra Corp? "A development firm. On paper, they invest in real estate, turning rural land into luxury resorts and private communities. And off the record, they specialize in removing obstacles. People, legal problems, even entire communities. Whatever stands in their way, they wipe it out." 2 days later, I got an anonymous text message. "Meet me at Willow Cafe. 10 p.m. No cops. No cameras. I'll explain everything." I knew it could be a trap. But if I wanted to understand why they wanted my land so badly, I had to go. At exactly 10 p.m., I walked into the dimly lit cafe. Sitting in the corner was a tall, well-dressed man in his 50s, sipping a glass of red wine. His suit was flawless, his posture relaxed. He gestured for me to sit. "Ethan Carter. A pleasure to finally meet you." "And you are?" He smirked. "William Greaves, CEO of Vestra Corporation." I clenched my fists under the table. "You've been trying to steal my family's land." No, he said smoothly. "Not steal. Acquire. We're willing to pay, generously. I'm not selling." He sighed, as if he had heard that 1,000 times before. "Ethan, do you really think this fight is over just because your little HOA queen got arrested?" "I know she wasn't the real problem. You are." He chuckled. "Clever boy. But here's what you don't understand. Your land isn't just valuable. It's critical to our plans." I leaned forward. "Why?" Greaves took another sip of his wine. "Because your farm sits on top of one of the largest untapped water reservoirs in the state. So it was never about the tourism resort." "No," he admitted. "That was just a cover. The real money is in controlling the water supply." My blood boiled. "You're trying to privatize the water." "Exactly," he said, smiling. "Bottling, distribution, contracts with luxury hotels. The water under your land? It's worth hundreds of millions of dollars." I shook my head. "I'll never sell." His smile disappeared. "That's unfortunate. Because if you refuse, you become a problem." I could feel the threat hanging in the air. "And what happens to problems, Mr. Greaves?" He finished his wine, set down the glass, and stood up. "They get removed." The next morning, I received a court notice. Vestra Corp was suing me. The lawsuit claimed that I was obstructing an essential public development project, and that Vestra had the legal right to claim eminent domain over my land. They were trying to take the farm by force. James called me immediately. "Ethan, this is serious. If they push this through the courts, they could actually win. How do we stop them? We need public support. We need to expose them before they can buy off the judges." Sarah was already one step ahead. She uploaded a bombshell report to her blog. Loudspeaker: Corrupt corporation tries to steal family farm for water profit. Loudspeaker. Within hours, the story went viral. The town turned against Vestra. Protests erupted. News crews arrived. Vestra had tried to stay in the shadows. Now, we were dragging them into the light. 3 weeks later, we faced Vestra's army of lawyers in court. Greaves sat across from me, smug and confident. The judge called the hearing to order. Vestra's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor, my client has the legal right to claim this land under eminent domain." Then James stood up. "Your Honor, we have overwhelming evidence that Vestra Corp falsified documents, bribed officials, and engaged in fraudulent activity to steal this land." He handed over a stack of evidence. "Furthermore, we have medical records proving that Ethan's grandfather was in the hospital when they claim he signed the transfer deed." I watched as the judge's expression darkened. Vestra had gone too far. And now, the law was finally catching up to them. After 3 days of testimony, the judge finally ruled. The court finds that Vestra Corp engaged in fraudulent and illegal activity. Their claim to the land is void, and all pending development permits are revoked. We had won. After Vestra's defeat, Greaves was arrested for fraud and conspiracy. Vestra Corp collapsed, with their assets frozen. The farm was finally safe. But I didn't want to just protect my grandfather's land. I wanted to turn it into something that would outlast Vestra's greed forever. So I turned it into a community-owned farmland and nature preserve. A place where families could grow food, where kids could play, where people could come together, not just to live, but to thrive. 6 months later, the county declared the land a protected reserve. One morning, I stood on my porch, looking over the fields.